Okay, let's talk about finding distance on a number line. So to find the distance between 2 points, or we might say the length of a segment, that really means the same thing, you're going to find the absolute value. I had to read it. You're going to find the absolute value of the difference. Remember, difference means subtract of the segment's endpoints, the coordinates at the endpoints. Okay, so absolute value, remember that's when you take a number and you make it positive. The symbol looks like this, okay? Basically, the distance, if you think about a ruler, distance you only measure in positive numbers. Okay, negative numbers would include direction, but with distance, you're just talking about how long is it, what is the length. It's always going to be positive. Alright, so just so you remember what that means. Okay, absolute value, the symbols look like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and try a couple examples. The first one says, what is the length of the segment graphed below? So I've got a segment here with endpoints at -4 and 3. So I'm going to actually do this twice. The first time I'm going to do, we're taking the difference, so we're going to subtract. It's going to be the absolute value of the difference. I make these nice and bold because I don't want them to look like the number 1. So subtract absolute value endpoints. Okay, so -4 and 3. Okay, so those were the two numbers I'm substituting in here. One coordinate was at -4, the second one was at 3. Okay, with order of operations here, you're going to go ahead and don't take the absolute value until you have found this difference. So -7 minus 3 is -7, and then you're going to take the absolute value of it. So the absolute value, remember, it means make it positive. If it's negative, it now becomes positive. If it was already positive, it's going to stay positive. Okay, so let's go ahead and check this. Distance, really, in elementary school, you just learned to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And sometimes that would be appropriate to do. Understanding the formula is going to make things easier for you down the road, so let's go ahead and practice that. What I want to show you first, though, is that actually I don't do it exactly this way. I don't take the absolute value of the difference, because when I do it, I always take the larger one. If I take the one on the right side of the number line, because that's getting bigger, if I take the one on the right, it's bigger. So if I subtract the one on the left, I'm going to go ahead and get my positive answer. So 3 minus -4, remember when you subtract a negative, this becomes positive. So 3 plus 4 is 7. Okay, so then I get it right away. Following the formula, I can still go ahead and take the absolute value. I take the difference here, I get positive 7, and then when I take the absolute value of 7, I get 7. Okay, so either way I'm going to get 7. Okay, so that's my length. Alright, let's try one more. One more thing I want to show you too is, remember that absolute value is distance from 0. If you look at, if 0 is between your endpoints, this is 3 and this is 4. That's a total of 7. So, I see a lot of students do some problem solving when it comes to finding length because they might forget the formula, and that works. Okay? Alright, let's look at the next one. The second example says the directions are worded a little bit different. It says find the distance between the endpoints of the segment graph below, whereas this one said what is the length of the segment graph below. Those questions are exactly the same. Okay, I'm just finding out how long it is. So down to example 2. Find the distance. So I'm going to go ahead and I can use the distance formula. It would be the absolute value. If I take the one on the left minus the one on the right, I definitely need to use the absolute value bars. But remember, if you go the other way, the larger one, -2, minus the smaller one, -14, You won't have to take the absolute value in the end, but I'm going to write them just so that it's not confusing. Okay, let's try it. If we did it this way, remember when you subtract a negative, okay, that becomes positive. Negative 14 plus 2 is negative 12, and then you're going to take the absolute value. So it's positive 12. Okay? I want to make sure this is very clear actually. A common mistake that I see is when this is minus, students sometimes forget their number is negative. It's the difference between these two numbers. So there has to be a minus even if this second number is negative. Okay, so like here it's negative 2 minus negative 14. That minus is still there and that negative is still there. Okay, when you subtract a negative, this becomes positive. So negative 2 plus 14 is positive 12. And of course I didn't really need the absolute values if I took the big one minus the small one. Okay, now I like to check, like everything, I like to try and find a way to check. So if I count this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I might get a little nervous and say, wait a minute. Oh, okay, this makes sense because look, these are going by 2's. Okay, on this number line, we could have gotten away with that. We could have been like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 because the increments were going by 1's. Here, our increments are going by 2's. So whatever that was, which I counted 6, I would be doubling it because each one is 2. So 12 looks pretty good. I'm happy with that answer. Looking at one more thing, just since I mentioned it up here, another way that I see students problem solve, this one had endpoints on two different sides of 0, so I added those lengths. Okay, I have the difference. The distance here is positive 3, the distance here is positive 4. That's what absolute value means, the distance from 0. So if you come down to this one, some students solve this by problem solving. They say, okay, well, negative 14, that's 14 away from 0. And then negative 2, that's 2 away from 0. But because these are on the same side of 0, instead of finding the total, I don't want this part. I'm actually subtracting. So 14 minus 2 is 12. So that's another way that I've seen students get creative to solve this. But in the end, if you want to memorize the formula, that will always work. It's the absolute value of the difference of the endpoints. Subtract, make it positive.